Jack Barnett, age 26, is charged with murder and found guilty. He is issued a life sentence at an asylum. The court trials took place on the 14th of February, 1993. The incident took place on the 24th of December in 1992. District of Columbia, Washington. Jack Barnett drove his pickup truck to a small ranch just outside the city. This farmhouse stood on a plain, surrounded by towering trees. Its proprietor, David Shank, has hired Jack to find and kill what he thinks is attacking his livestock, a wolf. Being a professional hunter, Jack sees this as a quick and simple task. David Shank offers all of the information he has on the attacks. Shank noticed that he would find one of his goats missing and would spot a cow corpse. These were no ordinary corpses, though. The carcasses seemed to be riddled with holes, about 10 of them. These were deep, gaping holes, unlike any that would have been left by a wolf's teeth. The only evidence of non-human entry or exit onto Mr. Shank's property were some deer tracks. They walked into the house, which was fairly ordinary as Jack was concerned. They sat at the table where they had coffee and discussed the terms of their agreement. Jack would be paid only upon completion of the task. It was around 5 o'clock when Jack began investigating. He first went to see the barn. Nothing strange aside from a hole-ridden cow corpse and deer tracks. Barnett went around the whole area. Nothing of interest. It was too late to investigate further. Night was falling quickly. Jack and David prepared. 2 hunting shotguns, each utilizing 12-gauge rounds, strong enough to pierce through 2 inches of steel. Their secondary arms were standard 9mm pistols, both of which were semi-automatic. And so they waited near the barnyard. It was 10 o'clock in the evening, or at night. David and Jack waited for a good 2 hours. Shank, who fell asleep on the cold, moist ground. A rustling sound came from the woods nearby. Jack's hands were shaking. He trembled. He was sweating like a pig. His forefinger inched only toward the trigger of his shotgun. And as a figure appeared out of the forest, a loud bang echoed across the wilderness. A ringing sound in Jack's ears prevented him from concentrating. His head spun and his eyes wandered, searching for something to make him relax. But what he found was far from relaxing. A half-dead, bloody deer with a red, gut-strewn paste hanging out of its place fell to the ground. As this creature twisted and jerked, Barnett passed out beside David, who surprisingly remained asleep even after the gunshot. Still dizzy from whatever happened, Jack rose from his slumber. The deer had now been dead for 3 hours. It was around 3 in the morning, and this living nightmare had just begun. Jack managed to prop himself up with the help of his gun, of course. He placed his hand on Shank's shoulder, shaking him lightly. The pair went over to the cornfield, where Jack had investigated earlier, and much to their surprise, they spotted 2 humongous antlers protruding out of the stalks. They entered the small forest of crops as they loaded up their weapons. 5 feet away, the sound of breathing and footsteps plodding through the damp soil filled their ears. 4 feet away, the 2 men took a few steps. 3 feet away, their breath condensed in the chilly morning air. 2 feet away. Jack was hyperventilating ever so quietly. His heart raced, His spine tingled. Then he put his finger on the trigger. Trigger, click, bang, echo, deep breath, plop. "Better him than us," said Shank, who managed to smile at the dead moose's carcass. The two were breathing heavily, as if they had just ran a marathon. The pair headed back to the farmhouse. Door, knob, twist, open, enter, close, chain lock, slide, walk away. And for a moment, they felt safe. Everything was perfect in the little ranch house. Shank told Barnett to get some rest. Jack went to the guest bathroom and washed up, the freezing water hitting his face, causing him to briefly shout. The sound of that shout never reached Shank's ears, though. The noise of heavy rain filled the corridors and rooms of the house. Jack jumped due to the brief flash of light, followed by a heavy cracking sound. Jack tilted his head towards the small window in the wall. What he saw next was indescribable. A pair of antlers entered Jack's peripheral vision. Then it disappeared due to the absence of light. Another strike of lightning. But what Jack discovered was that this was not a creature he had ever seen before. The antlers were now resting upon what seemed to be a human head. He scanned the figure closely, which had its back turned on Jack. The porch lights were then triggered due to movement. Now Jack could see. A head with antlers. A human head with antlers. Then Jack saw its body. The figure harbored human-like features, yet at the same time it looked intriguing. Long, spider-like arms, like arms that a man shouldn't ever have. Its skin was as pale as gray could get. Its figure was unnerving. The thing's bones were all too evident, as if they were going to be ripped out of the figure's skin. The legs. Jack had seen legs like these before, except that they were attached to the body of a deer. These legs were very long and slender. Its feet were hidden in the ground, if it had feet at all. Then, the lights went out. Lightning. The figure was now closer to the window, still having its back turned. Darkness. Then, light again. Jack froze. The thing was now looking into Jack. It was not just staring. No, it looked into him. Jack was frozen. He didn't stop staring back. Whether it was out of fear or awe, he stared. The eyes of that creature were dazzling in a horrifying sense. They were white as mist. This whiteness filled its eyes, nothing but white. Its smile was most unnerving. It smiled in a way that looked wrong, as if its jaws were too small to hold this terrifying grin. Darkness. Light. The thing was gone. Jack fell to the floor and started breathing heavily. He closed his eyes and hummed himself a lullaby. For some reason, Jack did not ask himself what he had just seen. A sense of familiarity struck him. Jack put on a coat and went outside. He was now looking at the deer tracks, and he followed them into the forest. What he found was shocking. The deer tracks morphed, track by track. The hooves became hands, human hands, imprinted into the soil. The hairs on his body stood. Goosebumps were now all over his skin. Then he goes into the barn where another horror awaited him. A fresh corpse of a cow. Same as the others, it was ridden with holes. Jack nearly vomited. He leans in closer, touches the carcass, and it turns out to be hollow. as if the cow had just been professionally gutted from head to toe. His skin was crawling. He shuddered. It was 4 a.m. Then Jack hears a loud sound from the house, the sound of a door breaking. He runs. Arriving at the door, he stops. The door was still there though, intact. But then he turned around, and the figure towered over Jack in all of its 9-foot terror. In its hand was a familiar object. The object's name was David Shank. The figure walks closer. It contorted its back and hunched. It bent its arms in strange ways, causing Shank to be flung around freely. And now it was standing over Jack. It smiled, the smile that only it could make. Jack closed his eyes as the figure stood over him, unblinking, unmoving. DC police find Shank's body impaled on a tree, full of holes. A shotgun was placed near this tree. Sound evidence of a murder. The boy is ridden with holes, but did not turn out to be a body. It was a piece of skin wrapped in clothing. The police find James's fingerprints on the gun. In court, Jack claimed that it was not him. The only thing he said throughout the duration of the trials. He's going to come for you, all of you, one by one. Then he'll take me. When they asked him what was it, he simply titled it, The Elk Man. Little is known about the Elk Man today. It has only been seen once, and the sighting has been dismissed as a criminal delusion. Based on Barnett's description, the Elkman had eyes that would shift from normal black people eyes into completely white or pitch black. This suggests that this creature has an extremely high level of perception in terms of sight, considering it can even see. The limbs of the creature were described as bony and deer-like. This would suggest some biological similarities between the creature and some of today's quadrupedal mammals. I'd like to start off by saying that I don't even have a clue why I'm posting this, or really at all. Maybe I'm afraid of dying or something. The events described in this story happened a month and a half ago, in Shenandoah, West Virginia, although I typed this up about 2 weeks ago. I just haven't really had the guts to post this until what happened yesterday. The story goes that in late September, when my family went to go visit our relatives, who invited us up to celebrate one of them getting like $2,000 in some scratch-off lottery thingy. They live in this really shitty part of Shenandoah that people from Charlestown, Shepherdstown, and Ranson like to call the Squalor Holler. It's way up on the mountains, and exactly like how everyone pictures it when they hear about it. Nothing but ramshackle shacks, rusty, rebuilt trailers, and everything covered in decade-old Christmas decorations because they're all too busy being smelly rednecks to ever clean up. Real Deliverance-like shit here. Just no rivers or canoes. The relatives we were visiting are absolutely confirmed inbreeders. All cousins having sex with each other. We don't refer to them as aunt, uncle, whatever. Just relatives. Not terrible people or anything. Just absolutely cartoonish. Depressing hillbilly stereotypes. So anyway, we're up here in this godforsaken trailer. It sucks. There's like 8 of them. Plus me, my dad, my mom, and my sister. About 2 hours in, my mom takes my cell phone so that I can focus on family time together, which is bull because all we did the whole time was eat TV dinners and be forced to watch NASCAR and other stupid stuff. After like 6 hours of this, about 10 minutes before we're supposed to leave, it starts raining. We know how treacherous the roads can get up on the mountain, so we decide to wait for the rain to die down. Flash forward 2 hours later. It's dark as hell, 10 o'clock, and there's a flood warning for the area. I have my phone back this time. No reception though, of course, because we're in the mountains. I'm playing Tetris and Texas Hold'em and stuff, when suddenly, I hear my dad start losing it in the next room. I walk over, and it turns out that they let slip that they'd buried their kid, Thomas, outside, and apparently were afraid the rain would wash up his body, or some other crap. The kid was like 6. He was attacked by a dog, and they never told the cops. Just buried him like he was a family pet. My dad's flipping his shit, and rightfully so, because, we live in the 21st century and all. So our relatives say that they'll sort it all out in the morning. My parents tell me and my sister to stay in the same room as them during the night, and we do. None of us really suspected that they'd killed Thomas or anything, since they're really peaceful people. They didn't even own any guns aside from this one old-timey double-barrel shotgun they had on a mantle. Nevertheless, we were creeped the hell out, I should say, and intended to tell the police in the morning once we got to town. So, it was like 3 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. Power had gone out for the 5th time or so, and I'm not able to charge my dead phone. The worst part is, I could see Thomas's little grave right outside my window, a little cross on it and everything, and I assumed the kid couldn't have been buried deep at all since they were so worried about him just washing up out of the grave. So I was just so fixated on that, kept being drawn to looking out the window. And then I saw the worst thing in my life. Something was creeping through the trees toward the house. I stared at it for a while but couldn't get a good look at it since it was raining and the brush was so thick. For a few minutes, I assumed it was 2 really pale horses, kind of just ambling through the woods, side by side. But then it walked into the moonlight, and I saw that it was all one thing. Like a kind of human torso, but wider. It finally stepped into full view, and I saw it had something like 6 legs, kind of somewhere between a beetle's legs and a horse's legs. 2 arms, right where someone would normally have had them, but they were about half a foot longer than any normal man's arms. It had a bald head, but the face looked like some sort of bizarre masquerade ball kind of mask. This thing clenched up, furrowed forehead, and a nose that looked like some sort of crow's or raven's beak. It didn't have eyes either, just the depressions where the eye should go. It looked like it had a human mouth underneath its proboscis. What still strikes me to this day is that it seemed to have a penis too, like right on the abdomen where a normal person's penis would be. The thing moved gracefully and made these soft thumping noises when it moved. It must have been like 7-8 feet tall, but sounded like it weighed maybe only 150 pounds at most. It starts walking towards Thomas's grave, and then I finally snap out of whatever trance I was in and just scream. My mom was the first to wake up, and I tell her to look outside the window. She rushes over quickly and doesn't really understand what she's looking at. After a minute though, the thing bends down and starts pawing at the grave with its hands. My dad and Jasper rush in, and Jasper just loses it, screams like a little girl and runs back out to the room, yelling for his father. "It's outside, it came and it's outside." I look back and see this thing is digging furiously at the ground, kicking up huge amounts of dirt. I hear these sounds of running feet through the house. I think they were looking for the shotgun. The thing reaches into the hole and grabs up what I only assume was Thomas's body by the leg in one hand. The thing kind of gallops back into the woods, snapping all these branches, and that's when we hear it. A kid crying. The sound of a child sobbing and crying from the direction that the thing took off in. We left as soon as the rain let up at like 5 a.m. I don't even think we told anyone at the house. Drove straight back to Ranson, only stopping for gas. No one said a word to each other. My family refuses to speak about what happened. I tried to bring it up once, just to make sure it was real. My dad told me to shut up, so I did. I typed this up about 3 weeks after it happened, but just saved it to a notepad file and left it alone. Never mentioned any of it to my friends or anything. Just tried to erase it from my mind by getting absolutely messed up drunk whenever my thoughts lingered on it. It mostly worked, up until yesterday. See, I work at this gas station in Ranson, from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. I work the register, keep the place clean, and take out the trash. Yesterday, when I was bringing the trash bags over to the back of the building for the dude in the morning to take care of, I heard what I had assumed to be some junkie messing around in the dumpster. I yelled at whoever it was just a couple of times to get out before I would call the cops. But as I walked towards the source of the noise, I suddenly heard those same footsteps. That soft thump-thump, hooves or feet, or whatever the hell they were. I turned right around and went back into the store and just hid behind the counter. I looked over at the outside security monitor and saw some kind of movement just off screen. Something huge casting a shadow and moving. Catch a glimpse of, I don't know, an elbow or something. A pale limb darting in and out of view. It had to have been the same thing. I waited for it to leave, and after a while, it did. I woke up behind the counter at 6 a.m. this morning to my manager giving me this look like I'm a drug addict or something. Went home and typed the rest of this up. That's about it. It's finally about time that I released this story. So, this is something that happened to me about 2 years ago at my friend's house. She lived right across a fairly busy 2-lane road from the parking lot on our college campus. I say this because the tall lights in the parking lot come into play later. The house has a bay window in the front of it that spans across almost the entire front side. In front of this window is a small porch without railings, and a 2-person porch swing. Inside the window is the living room that has a huge sectional couch. And covering the front window is a thin purple tapestry. You can see silhouettes through it, but can't make out any features. Her front yard is about 20 feet long, with tall bushes lining the sidewalk, and the side of her property has 5 tiny evergreen-looking trees that are roughly about 6 feet tall. Now that you have a makeshift diagram, let me explain my encounter with whatever it was. The other 5 people in the house were asleep, and it was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to smoke a cigarette because I couldn't sleep. I'm sitting on the front swing and I hear rustling. I figured it was literally any type of animal and ignored it. But then, I heard what sounded like something on 2 legs shuffle through the leaves on the sidewalk at a very fast pace. You can recreate the sound by doing a fast shuffle without lifting your feet off the ground. Now I'm alert. I think I even said, "What the hell?" out loud. So I stand up, still smoking my cigarette. Look over at the right side of the property with the tiny evergreen-esque bushes. The sound trailed from the left to the right of the property. Now, like I said, the parking lot is across the street. The tall lights are on at all hours, so it illuminates from behind, leaving me to only see silhouettes. I see something that may have been about 4 feet tall. It looked like it would have been a little shorter than my chest height, and I am 5'4". It was peeking out at me, like it was curious, but I also felt like it was malicious, because I got this overwhelming sense of dread and fear. We stared at each other for what felt like 3 solid minutes. I felt like I was in a trance. The best way to describe the thing I saw would be like it was proportioned but malnourished. Someone once suggested that it might be a midget. I apologize if that term is not PC, but I know for a fact it was not. This thing was very thin and perfectly proportioned, like a thin and sickly child. I guess it kinda looked like that little guy from Lord of the Rings movies. You know, Gollum? I looked down at my cigarette for no more than a second. When I looked back up, it was gone. I heard movement, and I said, "Screw this," and ran inside, locking the door behind me. Then, sitting on the couch, I was staring at the window when I suddenly saw something run across, blocking a portion of the light from the parking lot as it went by. For it to do this, it had to have been on the porch where I just was. So that's basically my experience. I would love some insight on what you guys think. And just in case anyone believes it's an animal, the area was in South New Jersey, fairly rural and about 10 minutes away from the Pine Barrens. No, I don't think this is a Jersey Devil. I'm just giving geographic information. Thank you. I've recently decided to move from my sister's home, and I was telling my older brother about a few sightings me and my sisters have been having over the last year or so. These were on multiple occasions and at random times of the morning and night. He told me to look it up online since he's crazy into supernatural things, and he told me it might be a Dogman. I don't know what that is exactly, but these posts I've seen here are more accurately describing the creature we've been seeing, and I decided to tell about my own similar experiences. The first time I saw it, I was looking out the front door. I always check outside before I take the dogs out because we live in a kind of town home community, and people have all types of vicious dogs not on leashes, and I never want to have an encounter with any of those dogs. Our front door is all frosted, except the center, which is the only part you can see out of, and it's shaped like a rose. I took a look outside and caught a sight of a doggish-shaped kind of creature, but without my glasses on, I just thought it was a dog, and to be sure of this, I put my glasses on and cracked the door just to get a better look. The only way I can describe this creature to anyone is that it was very spiny and it was hunched on all fours. It looked exactly like a human pretending to be a dog from behind, like it walked kind of funny on its legs. I slammed the door and turned around to yell for my sister's attention so she could also see what I was seeing. But when I looked back outside, it was gone, vanished, like it was never even there. And this area is heavily wooded across from our townhouse, so I figured maybe it was a dog, and I was just super sleepy and hallucinated everything about it. This is Georgia. I've lived here my whole life, and the weirdest thing I've ever seen was a drunk man trying to ride a dog like a horse. I talked to my eldest sister the next day about it, and her reaction was, "Yeah, what the heck was that thing? I've been seeing it a few times when I pull in from work. The other night, my headlights flashed on it and it ran into the woods." She later called it a creepy white dog, but admitted that she'll sit and wait in the car for a bit before coming in, just to make sure it's gone. She even called me once and asked me to unlock the door so she can make a run for it. Some of our relatives has said that it's just a dog and we shouldn't worry about it. Now, you guys don't have to do this, but if you were to get down on all fours, raise your back just a little bit, and walk across the floor just like that. That's what it was doing when I saw it. Every step it took looked, well, like a human pretending to be a dog. We've never seen its face though, and I'm a little scared to wonder what it actually looks like. So, my first sighting story is actually an old friend of mine's who I haven't seen or spoken to in years, but I still remember this very vividly to this day. It must have been about 96, and I had just turned 22. I was at a party with a few friends, and the host of the party was a daughter of some wealthy family. She was a bit of a spoiled girl from what I can remember, and her parents had this really amazing house, which I remember having this pretty awesome chandelier at the entrance of one of the highest ceilings I have ever seen. Anyway, the house itself was in solitude and was the only house around for some distance. To get to it, you had to drive a minute or two along this really long road that wasn't lit up at all. The house was surrounded by a lot of forest, but had a small lake nearby. Now the part had been going on for a good few hours, and a buddy of mine was showing up pretty late because of working late or something. I have no idea why, because it was years ago, but I know he showed up fairly late. I remember being in the kitchen, talking to someone, and in he comes, bursting into the room, fully out of breath, and immediately comes to me and interrupts my conversation. He was extremely hysterical, and I remember telling him to calm down and to breathe. He then began to say that his dad dropped him off on the start of where the longest road began, and his dad was in a hurry. I remember thinking why the hell his dad would let him walk across a dark forest road to a secluded house at night on his own, but was sensible too. But hey, who am I to judge someone else's family? My friend was saying he was walking up the road, about halfway, drinking his cans when he heard a sort of growl from behind him. Thinking he was about to get attacked by a wolf or whatever, he began to walk at a much faster pace. And it wasn't until he turned around, and about 10 feet from him, at a tree, was this hunched over white creature. I remember him constantly calling it this tall, white thing. He said it had a huge head and a gaping mouth. He let out a scream, and then ran as quick as he could to the house. He made it to the house and busted in without looking back, which he then immediately found me. Now at the time, and for years after, I personally just thought he saw an animal, and his imagination went wild. I think people for years would just go, "Yeah, dude, whatever," when he would bring it up. But he never let anyone get to his head, and he was always so defensive over what he saw. Now to my story, and why I now firmly believe my friend. I was camping with my wife and daughter in Minnesota last year at the beginning of July. For summer, the campsite we were at was pretty quiet, but there were a few families near our tents. It's next to a river and is covered by thick forest. Now the opening of our tent faced north towards the river. It was truly an awesome view coming out of your tent. It was close to sunset, but still fairly lit enough just to see across the river clearly. I remember specifically saying to my wife that I needed the lighter to start the stove to boil some water for dinner. Now, I remember setting up the stove, and as I looked up to get a glimpse of the river, something caught my eye. There was this thing walking through the forest on the other side of the river. It was incredibly tall, and its limbs were so skinny. It didn't seem to look in my direction until someone from another family at our campsite shouted. Not about the thing across the river, just about something else. That shout made it look over in my direction, and I still remember its pale, bulbous head looking straight at me across the river. It then haunched over on all fours and began to crawl away at an incredible speed into the opposite direction. I didn't sleep at all that night. I didn't tell my wife or daughter because I didn't want to terrify my little girl, because I know it would have freaked her out. The next day, we were supposed to stay another night, but I did not let that happen. My wife asked why I let her know what I saw, and she knew I wasn't lying. Trust me, she would have known if I was. That creature still gives me creeps to this day. It's actually giving me a few sleepless nights, but finding out how many people have seen exactly what I have always helps a bit. I was reminded of something me and my friend both saw at night in a park in Montana, well over 10 years ago. When I remembered it, I got intense shivers down my spine because I had completely forgotten all about it. We were about 14 or 15, walking through our local park and probably shouldn't have been out as late as we were, 12 to 1 a.m.-ish. We were walking through the big soccer fields towards the playground that had just been built, and surrounding the playground and soccer fields were quite a few trees. We saw a really tall, skinny white thing on 2 legs that reminded me of some kind of humanoid rabbit, but without ears, and it was striding really elegantly and quickly from tree to tree. It seemed like it was hiding from us, and then it peeked out from behind a tree. I remember thinking it was a deer at first glance because of its long legs, and then I saw it was walking on 2 legs. We had crossed over half the soccer field, so it was pretty close, maybe 100 to 100 feet away. We both nearly lost our minds, but were frozen in place watching it. After a few moments of having a stare down with this thing, it ran away, bounding, and disappeared behind more trees. My buddy wanted to chase it, but I was too scared, so we left. The things I distinctly remember was it passed behind one of the soccer goals, and it was taller than it. It also moved so gracefully and smoothly, but fast. Anyway, thought you guys might like this, so here you go. So, I am from Alexandria, Kentucky, and I saw something last night that I couldn't entirely explain. Last night was Midnight Madness for our school. It's basically some stupid football event during the summer, but everyone goes to see people they haven't seen over summer. I went with my 2 friends and one of their girlfriends. We got there around 10:45. Me and my friends were getting pretty bored of the event, and my one friend had just bought dabs. For those who don't know what dabs are a very concentrated form of THC, often using butane, propane, CO2, or ethanol to purify and get the most THC possible from cannabis, so it's extremely potent. We got in my buddy's car and were looking for a place to smoke. We were driving around this subdivision that had very thick forests all around it. We settled on this abandoned house and decided to smoke in the woods behind it. My friend was setting up his rig, and we realized we had forgot the water for the dab rig. A dab rig is basically a bong, but for marijuana concentrate, and needs water or else it will be too harsh to smoke. Well, we had parked a little bit down the street, so no one would be suspicious of our activities. Nobody wanted to go back to the car because it was a 5-minute walk, so I decided to go back for the water. While I was walking back, I heard scratching from behind a nearby house. It kind of freaked me out, but I thought it just must have been a dog or some animal. I made it to the car and got the water and started heading back. As I was walking back by the house, I heard the scratching again. I began to hear it again, but then I heard what sounded like a footstep kicking up gravel when someone starts trying to run. I turn and see something that has kept me up all night. Now, I want you to keep in mind that I'm a 6'2", 17-year-old guy, so I'm bigger than most things. And this thing that I saw had me easily beat in height by well over 2 feet. It was slender, but with long, almost outstretched limbs. I couldn't really make out any more details, just due to the poor lighting. This thing or creature was running from one backyard to another. I never saw its face, only body. It ran on 2 feet, but it was faster than any person I have ever seen run. Hell, it was faster than anything I've ever seen run. The creature made it back from one backyard to the next, about 50 to 90 feet, in only a few seconds. I was standing in the middle of the street, about 30 feet away. I stood there for a second in complete shock. Then I ran as fast as I could to my friends. I ran through thorns and bushes to make it back to them. I ran and told them what I saw, and I'm not too sure if they believed me. But the panic in my voice was enough for them to know I had saw something. We all packed up our rig and went back to the car. I have been up all night trying to find out what I saw. The 2 closest things I have seen on the internet is something called the Dover Demon and something called the Wood Devil. I never saw its face, so I'm not too sure what it was. If anyone could help me explain what I saw, or has had a similar experience, please let me know. And please also know that I was 100% sober at the time of seeing this creature. I grew up in rural Missouri. My family moved there in 1985 when I was 4. About 15-20 minutes from the closest town, with the closest town being Wright City, about 15 minutes north. It was really in the middle of nowhere. You had to drive a mile or two down one gravel road, and before you got to the gravel road I lived down, that was about 1.5 miles long that only my family and our neighbor lived on. There was about 3,000 to 4,000 acres north of us that no one lived on, and about 1,000 acres south of us that no one lived on. It was all owned by the same guy who only came out during deer season to hunt the property south of us and lived in a town about 20 miles west. The land north of us was mostly incredibly hilly forest, with a few caves about 1 mile north of a house. The land south of us was about 50-50 woods to fields, with an old 100-year-old abandoned cabin deep into the woods. The property owner had told us that no one had lived there since the late 1800s. I had a few sightings while growing up there. I'd always told myself it was the Momo, the Missouri Monster, Missouri's version of Bigfoot, and wasn't until I saw a trail cam photo of what was said to be a forest ghoul several years later. This led me to do a little more research, which I'll mention later. First memorable sighting was back when I was just a teenager. Me, my brother, sister, and dad were playing a game I learned in Boy Scouts called Manhunt that was basically a blend of hide and seek and tag. We'd set a boundary around a cedar thicket just north of the house. Me and my little brother were on a team against my dad and sister. Me and my brother hid first, with my dad and sister eventually catching us. We then let my dad and sister hide and went to go find them. We ended up catching my sister, but couldn't find my dad, so we started working together. The cedars were thick and the sun was setting. We were probably in the last 10 minutes of daylight for the day. We wanted to catch our dad fast before we couldn't see anymore. We searched most of the area and didn't find him. Eventually, I spotted what looked like 2 feet, about 30 feet in front of us. They were barefoot and pale. Not thinking much of it, I told my brother I thought Dad had taken his shoes off, just to be more stealthy. We spread out about 20 feet apart and tried to sneak up on him from opposite sides, crouching the whole way so we could see under the cedar trees. But we couldn't see through the thicket. We got about 15 feet away before it realized we were coming up on it, and it took off. We both took off running after it thinking it was my dad. We chased it to the edge of the thicket where there was a small open glade before the start of the large forest that spread back into the hills. We yelled that he was running out of the bounds as we got to the edge of the thicket, and we noticed what appeared to be a pale, naked man jetting into the woods. This spooked the hell out of my brother and me, but we still wanted to believe it was just my dad playing with us. So we ran the opposite direction, back south towards the house, only to see my dad sitting next to my sister by a pond, easily 100 yards across the field from the thicket. We asked my dad how he got over there so fast, and him and my sister told us he'd been sitting there with her for 20 minutes now, waiting for us to figure out that he wasn't in the woods. My brother and me tried to explain what we saw to him, but he blew it off, saying that it was probably just a deer. Meanwhile, we had chickens multiple times as I was growing up. Normally, they'd be fine in the chicken coop for just a few months, but then something would start killing them, tearing open the wire fencing to the caged yard. Usually, we'd find 1 or 2 chickens just torn up, laying there in the yard. My mom and dad always said it was wild dogs, but the chickens never looked eaten, just slaughtered. He'd always repaired the fencing, yet it kept happening. Usually once it started, most of our chickens would be dead and gone within a week or 2. My mom would be upset since she's the one that wanted to have chickens, and would normally give up on them until next spring, when she'd get a couple dozen more. Sometimes she'd skip a year, but I can think of at least 4 to 5 occasions of getting batches of chickens, and them all dying. Eventually, she gave up and took a few years off from trying to raise chickens. My senior year of high school, she decided to try having chickens again. It was good at first, and then a couple of months later, they started getting killed again. This time though, it was peeling off the wire roof of the caged yard. The cage was about 5 to 6 feet tall. My dad said it was dogs, but the opening would normally be a few feet off the ground. I remember questioning my dad at that point, saying if it was dogs, wouldn't they be trying to dig under the fence, not going from the top? The slaughtering seemed to be worse than before, with dead chickens being tossed all over the yard, yet just torn up, never eaten, no bites taken out of them, nothing. My sister had gotten a pygmy goat the year before to raise for FFA. One day, we found it dead and mutilated as well. It was in a stable yard on the side of our barn, with a 6 to 7 foot tall fence around it. Yet something had still gotten to it. Parents still claimed it was dogs. Then, one night my sister's boyfriend was having a bonfire party, and I went over there with my sister, because my parents wouldn't let her go to a party without me going with her, just to watch over her. My sister got really drunk, but I didn't drink much because I was too busy watching over her. I think I had maybe half a beer all night. We left late that night, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. When I got home, I would park my truck in the yard next to the driveway, usually facing the chicken coop. I pulled in and my sister just started screaming and pointing forward. I looked up and saw what at the time I could best describe as something that looked like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings on the roof of the chicken coop. It was staring right at us, crouched down, just like Gollum normally was in the movies. It was pale white, and it had a very, very thin layer of hair on the top of its head, probably less than Gollum had in the movies, and it had 2 red eyes that glowed in the headlights. It appeared to be hissing at us. I locked the doors and quieted my sister down, then started honking the horn and flashing between my brights and regular headlights. Me and my sister were both freaking out. It jumped off the back of the chicken coop towards the direction of the woods north of the house, and I lost sight of it. My parents had turned on the outside lights at that point and were looking out the door. I grabbed my sister and ran as fast as I could inside with her. When we tried to tell my parents what we saw, they of course refused to believe us, told us we were just drunk and full of shit. I tried to tell them I wasn't drunk, but they wouldn't believe me. Sadly, my sister was so intoxicated, she didn't even remember coming home the next day. A few nights later, we were all gathering up in the living room to watch a movie we had rented from the video store. As we were watching the previews, we heard the chickens screeching. My dad was still convinced it was dogs and had a loaded .30-30 rifle by the back door, ready for when they showed up again. He ran and grabbed his rifle and a spotlight, also near the door, and ran out back. Few moments after he went outside, we heard a gunshot, followed by continuously firing until he had emptied the whole clip. This was very unlike him. Growing up, he taught me and my brother that a good hunter only takes one shot at something. If you need two or more, you're not a good enough shot. He even made us get our first kill with single-load muzzle-loaded black powder rifles before we could use a regular rifle with a magazine. Never in my entire life had I seen or heard my dad unload a full clip at something. He charged back in and immediately told us kids to go lock all the doors and windows to the house. He was white as a ghost. Meanwhile, he said he needed to talk to my mom. He took my mom into the back room and closed the door, where they went and talked for a good 20 minutes. I already knew what it was. I was already scared before he even went outside. Me and my brother and sister waited in the living room until they got done talking. I asked him what he saw, and he told me he didn't want to talk about it and not to bring it up again. The next day, him and my mom decided to slaughter all the chickens, and they wouldn't be getting any more. To this day, my dad still won't talk about what he saw, and nowadays acts like it never happened and plays stupid. I went off to college a couple months later, and I never saw it again after that. I'd sometimes tell people, though, they're my Momo story, but never really thought much about it. That's pretty much it as far as sightings go. This next part is a little more weird stuff I learned about the area. A decade or so later, I was dating a girl who claimed she was sensitive, claimed she could feel and see things like ghosts, magic, and just having a third eye. I always found it cute and a little personality quirk of hers, and didn't really buy into it. Anyway, I hadn't told her that story yet, and we were out at my parents' house, sitting around a fire in my parents' backyard. She started acting weird. She turned and started looking north towards the woods, and asked me if I knew anything about the wilderness. She said she was getting a feeling that something really ancient and evil was in the woods back there. Asked me what I knew. Then started asking me what happened on the land. Told me that something horrible had happened. After hearing my story, she said she thought it could be a ghoul. I honestly had no idea what, but it was enough to get me to go digging. I immediately saw a picture online shortly after Googling about ghouls that was labeled a forest ghoul. It was the famous trail cam pic. I immediately lost it. Was like, that's it. That's what I saw back then. Read about how, although they like to kill stuff, they don't like fresh meat, and prefer stuff that's starting to rot. It totally made sense to me that why it would slaughter the chickens, only to come back for them later, after they had been lying around and rotting. I then started trying to research the area's history, just to find out more. Where you first turn off the paved road onto the first gravel road, there were foundations of old buildings in the woods. Walls and roofs gone, just the stone floors remained. One of the old men that lived nearby when I was growing up said that one of them used to be the old post office. Did some more digging and found out it was one of the old town Hickory Grove, once the county seat as well. I knew that was the name of the voting district, but I didn't know it was a town ever. It was established in the early 1800s, but after the Civil War, a group of rebels that had refused to surrender had come through and ransacked the town. They had gathered them all up in the church, and where they locked them up and burned them all alive. Turns out that church was about less than a quarter of a mile from where my parents' house was. And the decade or so that followed, what was left of the town had died out. The few residents that were left had moved away, claiming the town was cursed. Before 1900, the town had vanished. I also learned around 1920 that they had dug out the area where the church had burned down to collect all the remains they could find and properly bury them. There was now a large quarried pond where it once was. Not sure how relevant the information is to the sighting, but I always wondered if perhaps they were related. The land north of my parents' house has been getting developed over the last decade or so. There's a high-class gated rural community that brought it up, who just got a township a few years ago called Innsbruck. They've been clearing the land and building mansions and lakes back there. Lots of old CEOs and retired professional athletes live back in there. I've always wondered if that chased it off, or if it still lurks around at night. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be reading some encounters of Skinwalkers and Dogman. These encounters are reportedly true by real eyewitnesses just like you. If you have had strange experiences, either with the paranormal, cryptids, or the mysterious, you could either email me your encounter for me to read on this show for everyone at stories@whatlurksbeneath.com, which, again, you can find the email in the description below. Or if you have an encounter you would like to talk to me about and be on my Eyewitness podcast, please reach out to me. I would love to share it with my audience. Now, on with the encounters. These events are true and will be long. I had my first encounter with a cryptid creature a few years back. I was walking the lane at night when I realized how quiet everything was. I became unsettled and started to feel watched. The moon was bright enough to light up the entire field where I live. I looked behind me and to my horror saw a pale, gaunt, and almost corpse-like humanoid creature crawling up from the field on all fours. It looked just like a Wendigo, portrayed in Until Dawn. There was no way it didn't see me, but it kept to itself. Its eyes were black, but gave a dead, piercing white glow. It had long claws and moved in a smooth yet jerky motion. After that encounter, my grandma and I would be here talking seemingly in the house whenever one of us was alone, and in my case, I would feel as though someone or something was nearby. My second encounter was several months back in early to mid-spring, when I had rebelliously tried to walk home one night in an attempt to show how tough I thought I was. I got to the elementary school and noticed everything was quiet, and I started to feel a presence. I decided to walk the more straightforward path I thought would be faster on the main road. While walking, I caught movement at the edge of my vision. This night was particularly dark, and I have slightly above average night vision. Nothing too out there, but I can make out shapes and motion better than most. Anyway, I see a tall, bipedal black creature with coyote-like features dart between trees randomly and very unnaturally quick. It appeared emaciated and had fur patches on its body which looked coarse. I'm sure it knew I was there, as it had come from behind me to my right. I fast walked to the nearest streetlight and called to be picked up. I'm very sure I encountered a mysterious creature. Since these encounters, we have had weirdly ghostly chatter beings and photos and strange creature sightings more frequently in the area, from multiple types of monsters. My friend, who I consider my brother, is capable of feeling and identifying these creatures spiritually. He has pointed out 2 potential creatures and 1 possible Wendigo, as felt other beings as well. On some nights, something puts its presence in the air, and we both freak out and bar ourselves in my wife and I's room. I hope you enjoyed these true encounters. Thank you sincerely for listening. Hi, my name is Sam, and I'm not going to name the other people I was with due to privacy, so I will be calling them Ted and Alex. Also, I am from New Jersey, and this encounter happened to us in a park in between Central Jersey and North Jersey. I am also of Native American descent, and I'm pretty sure that a few nights ago, my friends and I encountered something which I believed to be a skinwalker. A few nights ago, my friends and I were just hanging around, driving, when one of them suggested we should go to the park and watch the sunset over the lake. We got to the park at around 7:15, and we ended up making our way to the trail, which led to the lake. My friend Ted ended up talking about cryptids and other stuff, and said we might encounter something at the park, as we were on native land, of course. My friend Ted then indicated that there was something ahead of us, and us calling his bluff, laughed at him. He then brought up a video of sound effects of the goat man trying to scare us. My other friend Alex said it sounded like a skinwalker, and as you know, when you're on native land, you can't say that name out loud. Just to clarify, there was no one on the path except my friends and I. 2 minutes after he said that name, I looked behind us and we saw we were being followed by something. It was tall, skinny, and moving very slow towards us. I said under my breath, "Oh shit," and my friends turned around and saw whatever I was looking at. I said to them that we should pick up the pace a bit, as it seemed a little weird that this thing came out of nowhere. We saw no indication of anything, no footsteps or rustling in the woods, and my friend said to me, once this thing appeared, they smelled something putrid, which in Native American lore, if you smell something putrid or disgusting, that's a sign of a skinwalker on your trail. So we ended up running as fast as we could down the trail to try and lose it. When we turned around, it was still moving at the same pace, very slowly. Thinking that we were safe, we started to walk at a normal speed. We were also close to a road with a bunch of cars roaring past us. Me being curious, I looked behind us to see if the coast was clear, and to my horror, I saw that this thing had caught up to us. It was now at least 100 feet away, making no sound as it moved, and we were horrified to see that it had no face. My friends and I decided it was a good idea to bolt as fast as we could back to my car. When we got back to the parking lot, I saw that the only real car that was left was my car, and whatever that thing was that was following us was horrifyingly real. Fast forward a day later, I was walking my dogs around my house, and I saw a cat come out of the woods and start walking towards me. Me knowing that skinwalkers can take any form, I went back inside, not taking any chances. A few hours later, I picked up my friend Ted, and we originally were going to go back to my house and play video games. But as soon as we got to my house, he said he felt dread, so we ended up just driving around a bunch. Today, he ended up telling me that whatever he saw at the park, he saw at my house, giving the same description as what we saw at the park. He said it was tall, skinny, and had no face, describing the same thing that we saw at the park. So, skinwalker or creature that stalked my friends and I for a few days, let's never meet again. I've always been into the paranormal, as most of us that visited this thread are. In January of 2019, I noticed something lumbering down my driveway. The window I was looking out faces over and above the drive, if that's clear. For example, I could see the roof of your car, but not always the bottom of the tire. Regardless, I noticed the movement. I look out and see what I initially thought was a bear, nose to the ground, kind of snuffling its head side to side, casually walking down the drive on all fours. A little geographical clarity. I live in town. The front of my neighborhood faces a major highway, but the back is all state game lands. I've seen some wildlife, turkeys, a deer here and there, and every skunk in the county apparently lives on my street. I don't see many squirrels, groundhogs, or chipmunks, which is a bit odd. I'm not very far from the city of Scranton, so Office fans can enjoy. About 7 miles from downtown, so I'm not exactly in the sticks. I watch this bear mosey down toward the street, its head lowered. I moved from the living room window to my bedroom window that has a full view of the street. Sure enough, here it comes. But something is wrong. I watch this not bear stand on 2 legs and casually walk out onto the road. I see pointed ears and a long snout. It's got its head raised, smelling the air. I felt pee run down my legs. This was no bear. I saw it in perfect silhouette under the yellow streetlight. It was either dark gray or black. The yellow light threw off the true color. It stood without effort, looked like one fluid movement. It then walked across the road, casual as you please, and kind of hunkered down in some scrub brush. I'm not sure what kind of brush, but it's like forsythia, all tangled and thick. Then I realized it was looking right into my bedroom. It had blue eyes, and I'm not sure if that was reflected light or that they were glowing, but it looked right at me. I lost my legs at that moment and sat down under my window. Absolutely panicked. I was home alone, with 5 cats and a dog who slept through everything. I didn't know what to do. My window is a big picture window, and if it wanted me, it could have easily gotten me. I cautiously got on my knees to peek over the sill, and I lost it. Didn't see eyes or it anywhere. It seemed to be either moving away from the forest, behind my house, or it decided to rest up in that scrub brush. What I saw under the streetlight is as follows. Darkish fur, high pointed ears, long muzzle. I never saw teeth or if it had a tail. It had hands with long claws that hung kind of limp wrist. If they were fully extended, they would have hung below the knee. It walked weird on dog legs. It looked heavily muscled, but had a tapered waist. It was about 7 to 7.5 feet tall, judging from where it stood in relation to the streetlight. It didn't seem aggressive, even when I felt it look right at me. I was terrified, but I didn't get a sense that it was pissed off it had been seen, as some people report. I didn't take a picture because I simply didn't think to. I was in a fair amount of shock, and I'm sure I'll eat shit for this, but sometimes your phone is the absolute last thing on your mind. The next day, I called Vic Hundiff of Dogman Encounters Radio. His advice was solid, and I try and remember it when I have to go out at night. There have been odd sounds. Tapping at my window. I can hear scratching of the siding. I don't see that many animals around the neighborhood. There used to be about 7 stray cats that I fed. All gone now. Once the weather broke, it's been quiet. I installed motion lights and bought 2 game cameras. I'm hoping they are in a sense like Sasquatch. They avoid game cameras. I don't ever want to see this thing again. Those of you who want to see one, pray that you never do. My encounter was non-aggressive. I can't imagine having to deal with this thing pissed off. I still can't sleep a full night, and every sound scares the hell out of me after dark. I live alone, and the .357 Magnum I own would probably just ruffle its fur. Thank you for taking the time to read this. It was a terrifying animal to see. I hope I never see it again, but sadly, that wasn't in the cards. But I'll tell you about that story another time. Hello. I promise this isn't an ARG or anything. I'll say that outright before anyone thinks otherwise. You honestly still might think I'm messing with you by the end of this, but I really promise I'm not. We are very scared, and I hope this can help us out. The reasons I believe this to be a skinwalker, or possibly a Wendigo, is due to several factors. 1. I literally live on a native burial ground. A lot of my town was built on a Raritan Native American burial ground. Even though I know I cannot find any research on mythical beasts or anything like that, I'm aware that Wendigos are native to the northeastern United States. Several of my close friends have had a very similar encounter with eerily similar circumstances that leads us to believe that there is something weird going on. Needless to say, if we're going crazy, we're all going crazy together. Now, before I start telling the subsequent stories, I would like to add that I have done a little research on this already, and I have heard that they may be able to contact you in your dreams. A little while ago, I had a nightmare where what I then believed may have been a Wendigo, but now believed to now possibly be a Skinwalker, was behind me. I could feel an imposing, warm breath figure. I said to it, "I don't know what to do." It then responded with, "You'll know soon." I would like to add that this wasn't a lucid dream. I had no control over what I was saying. When it touched me, I jolted awake directly into a panic attack. I have had bad nightmares ever since I was a little kid, with very similar outcomes. But this one felt different. Originally, I believed that it may have been some sort of sign for my brain to apply myself more, but now I think it's connected to this. I really hope I don't sound stupid, but I am seriously freaking out over this. The first story happened to my friend, and so we'll call her Allison, just for the sake of privacy. Her family owns 5 acres of property, a few hours away from town. A few months ago, her and a few of her friends went there, and something started running and slamming itself against the side of the house. Snow was falling from the roof onto the ground before the slamming. They looked through the window and saw a large figure run back into the woods. None of her family was up there to witness it, but there were 2 people who saw it happen other than Allison. As I'm writing this, I just remembered another dream I had, where it felt like I just woke up from a sleeping. I walked upstairs since my room is in a basement, and when I opened the door, I thought it bumped my dog with the door. Her food and water bowl is right next to the door, so I'm used to it. As I turned to look at the front door, my dog was standing in front of it. Realizing that what I bumped wasn't my dog, I turned to discover a bipedal beast hidden in the shadows of my room, storming at me. I then woke up. Soon after the encounter with Allison, my friend Eric was sitting on top of a jungle gym in town at night. I believe he was with 7 other people. I can't fact check it right now because Eric and I aren't talking for reasons I'll explain later on the timeline. At least him and one other person saw a 9-foot figure with glowing eyes and antlers in the woods surrounding the park. He knew about Wendigos because of the obsession I grew after my first dream, and ran as fast as he could. I thought he was messing with me, and I told him that Wendigos don't actually have antlers. but he stood by what he saw. I now believe this to have been a skinwalker messing with him, making him believe he saw a Wendigo. Things died down for a few months, and this time I completed that thing I had to apply myself for, and heavily advertised it around the whole Wendigo motive. Ever since then, the air felt heavy, and I felt like I was being stalked from the woods. But it could have also been me spooking myself into thinking that. But still. One time Allison was picking up Eric and I from the house. When I got in the car, she was clearly rattled. She told me that she saw a large bipedal deer standing in the middle of the road next to the tree line off a side road on my way to the house, just a quarter mile from the playground Eric had had his encounter a few months prior. I'm aware that actual people don't say large bipedal deer, but her dad's a hunter and it probably has something to do with that. We had to pass the road again, and when we got there were 2 police cars examining the area with flashlights. As she was about to drop us off later that night, we passed yet another time, where we saw that one of the police cars was still there, parked on the street with all lights off. Allison and Eric were pretty shaken up, and I tried my best to assure them that whatever we were dealing with, it couldn't have actually been a Wendigo. I wasn't entirely sure about that, but I'm aware that no Native American depictions of them had antlers. 2 months passed, and the encounters started happening closer together. All within the last 2 weeks. Allison was riding her quad around with some friends on her land just a few hours away, and they all felt a terrible feeling that something was watching them, only to hear something huge quickly moving in the woods around them. Whether it was a bear or whatever, it wasn't a good idea to stick around to find out. She says it was too fast to be a bear, and she deals with them over there all the time. Later at night, they were all sitting inside and they kept hearing Allison's car door open and slam shut. They were too scared to check what it was, but she said nothing from her car was missing or out of place that next morning. This wasn't that huge of an event, but Eric, Allison, my girlfriend Becky, and I were all sitting in Allison's car. Eric and I were sitting in the back seat. I noticed Eric looking over his shoulder, confused. I turned too and saw something drop to all fours and bolt into the woods, about 30 feet away from us. I'd like to note that this was my first actual encounter with the creatures outside of my dreams, and it stalking me. This is when I first started speculating it to be a skinwalker. Remember when I said that Eric and I aren't talking at the moment? For the last few nights this week, when he's laying in his bed, he'll hear someone knocking on his front door and back doors, along with his windows. He noted that sometimes it sounded like his family trying to get into the house, only for him to go to their rooms to find them all fast asleep. Needless to say, he hasn't been getting much sleep lately, and he's freaking out like crazy, and he's been really irritable lately, and I don't want to be around him. I talked to him once since then, but he hasn't added any new developments. Which leads us to tonight. My friend Tom, Becky, and I were sitting at a small seawall up the block from my house, still within a mile vicinity of the playground, the side road and the spot we parked when Eric and I saw it. Becky and I saw something dashing across the tree line, a little up the beach from where we were sitting. About 45 minutes later, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something creeping up the beach a little, hidden by a mound of sand that separates the sea wall and the road where it stood. Once it noticed that I saw it, it turned its body to profile and stood deathly still, probably to not look directly at us. I had a very unsettling feeling in my stomach as I inspected its grotesquely lengthy body and eyeless face. I can definitely say that what I was looking at was the same creature I saw the other day with Eric. I sat speechless for about 2 minutes before whispering over to Becky and Tom to turn and look too. We stared at it as it stood motionless in the road for another minute before I said we should catch it on camera. I was about to start recording when Tom's flash alerted it, and it sped off out of sight. We got back to my house a half hour later, and every few hours since there's been a loud banging on my front door and windows, freaking out my dog, along with Becky and I. We seriously need to know what this thing is and how to stop it. I'm aware that skinwalkers aren't inherently evil, but just maybe playful or mischievous. But we have all had bad feelings. If we're all going crazy, then we're all going crazy together. Some of you may know me from my post here, where I give as much info in Skinwalkers as I can. A while ago, I asked my mother about Skinwalkers. Now, my mother is a good source, but she also gave up some traditional beliefs to be a Christian, so she doesn't believe in Navajo things as much as others do. My father, on the other hand, is far more traditional in addition to being a Navajo policeman and investigator, so he's seen some things. He didn't say much about the subject, but that I haven't already said, but he did affirm some things. Skinwalkers are not trying to kill you. They are trying to make you suffer. The wolf is the preferred form since coyotes are too small and not right for the magic. Motives for skinwalkers usually amount to jealousy or envy. For example, someone has a shiny brand new truck, and the skinwalker is jealous of that person, or when someone is doing very well in life. Yi Nadloshi does not literally translate to, by way of it he goes on all fours. This might be a personal thing since my dad has always maintained that there are no direct translations of Navajo words. He explained by saying it describes how an animal with 4 legs walks. Watch a dog, a cat, deer, or any 4-legged animal, that is what Nadlush describes. But there are many ways to say walk. He kind of went on a spiel. He told me stories of how at least once a month he would get a call to investigate skinwalker sightings. One time, the person said they shot the skinwalker, and when daylight came, they followed the trail to a dead man caught in a barbed wire fence. He also had a story about seeing an alien craft, but it was just the morning star, and he was a little delirious from being awake for 3 days. This was when he was first starting out as an officer. He also told me that in Navajo words, they have power, so you must be careful with what you say. For example, do not lament having to care for your livestock as they may disappear, which is where the don't talk about skinwalker thing comes from, when really it's about all bad things, like death, poverty, hunger, or even misfortune. There I was, a little 5-year-old just out on the back porch with my dad listening to the foxes. I find their noises interesting and listen closely. Then I see it. Just standing there, a thing, an animal. I didn't know at the time. I saw its eyes, a glowing red full of fury and rage, and I immediately got bad vibes. So what did I do? Stupid 5-year-old me decided to stare it down, 'cause I'm tough. Then it darted. I looked around for it and tried to find answers, but none came. I told my dad what I saw, and I said I was scared. He shrugged it off as just my childlike imagination. Ever since that night, I've seen it. The head of a deer, the body of a wolf, and the deep Nor black wolf just the other night that came in my dream. I was laying down in my bed and fell asleep, and I woke up in my bed. Then I heard it. Slam! It bashed its head against my window, and at this point I had had enough. I grabbed a shotgun and shot. Its head fell on the floor, gushing with blood, but when I looked up its head was still on its body, but its hand was gone. It used its hand as a decoy. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my legs like needles. I looked down. My legs and hands had been ripped to shreds by the other hand. I immediately fell down. Then it bit. It bit again and again. It bit into my stomach. I looked up and watched it eating my intestines, and that's when my dream ended. I woke up at around 2 a.m. in a cold sweat. I didn't know what to do, so it stopped hunting me for now, but I don't know if it'll come back. I don't know if I want it to either.